Hey guys, it's Troll 9002. It's 12:30 a.m. I guess now Monday morning, the 8th of July, and I have a story for you called Bubbles the Mermaid. People wonder why other people are the way they are. Truth is, most people are molded and shaped by the world. Duh, right? For most people, it's not one thing that makes them the way they are or shapes them into how they are. It's a multitude of things. This is the story of Bubbles the mermaid. Bubbles had a huge, beautiful tail that had a blend of blues, silvers, grays, and subtle tones of gold. The bottom part where it fanned out looked like the feathers of a peacock, and when Bubbles would swim, bubbles would actually come from her tail because the space between her scales. At night, when the moon was bright, her tail would appear to glow like neon colors glow in black light. The way the light would sparkle off the silver and gold in her tail was amazing. Bubbles had a big family. She loved them, but most of the family wouldn't bother with her. Who knows why? Bubbles worked a great job and helped support not just herself but her ailing parents that she also took care of. She would go back and forth from work to home every day. She could she could work at the Caraloha shell stand. Every day the merfolk would come and shop, and they would spend clams like there was no tomorrow. Bubbles had a way of artistically beautifying the clams as home decor, or even prepare them for eating. Many people knew her around town and loved her bubbly personality. From the time she was born, her parents knew she'd be a happy baby, and that is why they named her Bubbles. The hole, that hole, Bubbles between the scales thing on her tail was an anomaly. Anyway, Bubbles had a brother and sister that never bothered with her. She never knew or understood why, but she accepted it gracefully and just lived life. Jealousy played a huge part in why the siblings didn't bother with her. Their tails never grew like hers did, and they were just never happy. One day, the stork dropped 2 baby girls on her sister and 2 baby boys on her brother, and all in an instant, the family was bigger. Life in the water was awesome and pretty mundane and predictable. The sad thing was, no matter what happened to Bubbles, she was always happy. Stab her in the back verbally? Happy. Screw her over at work? Always happy. It didn't matter. Bubbles knew she had to be happy for everyone else to be happy. That was some pressure, some ridiculous pressure. She attempted to be part of her nieces and nephews' lives, but even though her siblings were older, they still wanted nothing to do with her and would only call or message her when they needed something. Bubbles went every time they needed her, no matter what she had already committed to doing. One day, Bubbles realized that she was being used and didn't know how to deal with it. She so wanted to be there for everyone, but she just couldn't take it anymore, being called as a last resort, and for all other things ignored, left out, or looked over as an oversight. It's okay, people are humans, nobody's perfect, it happens, right? One summer after Bubbles had discovered the bigger town of Purple Coral, where there was a movie theater and bigger shopping places, and parks with hiking trails and fun stuff to do, there was even a lava ride and hot springs. And after exploring all of the stuff and seeing a movie, shopping there and riding the lava ride, Bubbles went back to work until her next vacation. And she told her sister and brother that there was a movie coming out that she wanted to go and see. It was a children's movie, so the kids could come with her. And there was never a reason for them to say no. After all, it was summer and there was no plans. But if something had arose, they could let her know. That way she would know whether or not the kids were available. Bubbles felt sorry, little snafu there. Bubbles felt it was not going to be a problem. After all, she had done and been to everything that was asked. She had babysat, and she had arrived at birthday parties, and done all she could as an aunt. And so finally the day came that her movie came out, and never having heard from her brother or her sister about plans for her to take the kids and see it, She called them both to see what was up. And that's when her sister answered and they talked about it. Said, "Oh, well, your brother's wife already took them to see that movie." "How could it be? It just came out today." A moment later, Facebook notifications went off with new posts, and it was pictures of the great day and how awesome the movie was. Bubbles was crushed, but it was okay. Several more incidents like this were always happening. Finally, Bubbles came to the conclusion she was just a horrible aunt that was unworthy of being with her nephews and nieces. I mean, even when she was with them at family events, they weren't there. They were off in their own little worlds. But that's okay. One day, Bubbles noticed that her tail was not as vibrant as it used to be. In fact, it had started falling apart scale by scale. Maybe she had ridden the lava ride one too many times. Dr. Google said it was from multiple heartbreak, but what was he talking about? Bubbles was always happy at home, at work, at church, always happy no matter what, so she blew off the diagnosis. Then one day, after a lonely hot summer, of begging to be part of her family's life, she was left out of a family trip to the Purple Coral to go ride the lava ride. She was told it was an oversight, but they were not sorry for leaving her out. That's okay. She moved on until a few days later, her beautiful tail was just naked, solid gray color, plain. The fins that once donned peacock feather-like designs on it were gray and withered. The tail that once sparkled and shimmered was now dingy, sad stone gray. So Bubbles buried herself into work and never bothered with anyone ever again. She was sick to her stomach all the time, going over any and all things she could have done to deserve to be treated like that. There was no reason for it. Even though she felt so alone, she still had her parents to take care of, and they loved her. So at least she had that family, and they do love her. As they were ignored and left out as much, if not more, than Bubbles was. One day, many years later, after turning into an old crabby mermaid, a giant tree fell into the ocean. What was up with that? A giant tree? It must have fallen off a passing boat, and they all heard the crashing sound it made as it hit the water and began to sink, which leads me to a joke. What's the best sound a trombone makes? The sound of it sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Thank you. That sound was the sound the tree made as it hit the bottom, causing a tidal wave of mud, silt, and muck into the water, making it impossible to see anything. And there was a hurricane on top of the water that was tossing the ocean so much that it wouldn't settle. Once again, Bubbles finally heard from her brother and sister as they were in need. She listened to their needs and this time made up excuses not to help. I mean, after all, that's how you're supposed to do it, right? Turns out the tree had landed on the lava ride in Purple Coral, sending lava everywhere and making it choose a different channel to run in. And that channel ran through the middle of Purple Coral and right through her brother and sister's yards and houses, as they were neighbors. And Bubbles' mom and dad lived in a totally different town called Seabrook. After seeking help from the in-law part of the family that was more equipped to handle their needs, Bubbles was saddened that she had lowered herself to their level. And so one day she just took off, and she didn't know where she was going. "But I'm grown. I'll do what I want," she said to herself. She just took off. Her ugly tail was more than she could handle, and her tail had grown ugly because of all the things she had put herself through. It was all her fault that her family wanted nothing to do with her. But what did she do? That was so terrible, it didn't matter. Bubbles was no longer Bubbles. Anyway, so after years of attempting to be evil, Bubbles finally admitted she was no good at being mean. Plus, it hurt her cold, dead heart to the point that it was hardly beating. And as she settled down on her new sand cave that was made from the settling silt, mud, and sand from the tree, the hurricane dispersed it over many miles and years. In the cave, there was no light, no warmth, no love, and she fell asleep and had a dream of a time way back when things were good and a smile spread across her face, and she slipped deeper into a real deep sleep, where nothing would have woken her. After many years of being alone, Bubbles knew this is how life was meant to be for her, and she was okay with that. Sometime in the middle of the night, a music eel, genus musicus, species, string eel, named G, weary from his travels, was looking for a place to sleep. As he floated aimlessly in and out of sleep, he saw the cave Bubbles was in, and he started swimming towards it to rest for the night. He turned in the cave, and with his dimly lit music tail, found and parked in the entrance for the night, and curled up with no treble, and slept. Between the currents of the ocean and the waves that occur from tides, sometime after G fell asleep, he floated backwards towards where Bubbles was fast asleep, and he floated back and bumped into Bubbles, and in a scared, startled shock, he ended up shocking Bubbles and himself severely. All at once, Bubbles' heart started to unharden from the ice that had encrusted it and made it beat again for life. No longer shallow pumps filled with depression, spite, and anger, full of love, beauty, and so much more than she ever had before. The mixture of heat and ice crystals caused an explosion in the cave, much like when you put a frozen turkey into the hot oil and everything just kind of blows up. Yeah, it kind of blew the cave to smithereens, which blew it to bits. The concussive force of the blast not only blew the cave, but also blew all the silt and mud off the town of Seabrook, and the home she once knew had been well preserved. Everything that had been buried by the silt mud that was stirred up by the tree that fell into the water was uncovered, and all was just as preserved as it was when it got covered. And so just as fast as the town emptied, the people came back. Bubbles' tail was changed by the explosion, and the stone gray color was blasted away, and underneath her scales, fins, and colors had already started to grow back, but not the way they once were. The same odd spacing that made Bubbles come out from her tail when in motion. The once long fins at the bottom of the tail that glistened blue-green like the peacock feathers were no longer peacock feather looking, but they were just blue, green, and silver, and now they had red. The red was from the hurt that incurred and the time she had wasted being alone. It was only a matter of time. Sorry. Hold on. The red was from the hurt that had incurred, and the time she had wasted being alone. It was only there as a reminder. Life moved on, and so did Bubbles, moved on from a town that ran her out because of ignorance, rumor, and misguided beliefs, was in the past. You see, they also assumed that she was to blame for the tree that buried the town of Seabrook. It was rumored that the shine from her tail had distracted the sailors, causing them to drop the tree. Later on, it was determined that that was untrue, and that the sailors were just drunk and stupid. Bubbles lived on forever, never talking about her past, where she had been or what she had done, and no one ever asked. She started over and tried new things in a new town, and her parents moved to Disneyland, where they lived happily ever after. Every now and then, for the most part, life went back to normal, and she lived how she wanted to live, because she was grown and did what she wanted to do. I know, it's a weird story. I would definitely love to see your comments, questions, and hit the like button if you want, but definitely, I don't mind discussing this story. Story's totally fiction. But thank you for tuning in. I ask you guys for some prayers for me. On Thursday I have another dental appointment, and she's going to pull more wisdom teeth. She had to wait on it because the gums had grown over it. So I'm going to have a couple of gingivectomies. And she's gonna pull a lot of stuff, guys. Just pray for me. All right. I guess I'll see you next story time or live stream. Y'all take care. Have a great week.